بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وآله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. The last part of the Book of Knowledge, section on the harms of knowledge and an explanation of the scholars of evil and the scholars of the hereafter. The scholars of evil are those who aim at seeking knowledge, is worldly comfort and attaining status amongst its people. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates from the Prophet alayhi salam, he said, whoever seeks knowledge of what is sought for the pleasure of Allah Almighty, like the knowledge of the Quran, the knowledge of Hadith, the knowledge of fiqh, right? Mostly religious knowledge, but it could also be, for example, knowledge that can be used to benefit people, that can be used to benefit society, but the person only acquires it for the sake of fame or wealth. Right? So whoever seeks knowledge of what is sought for the pleasure of Allah Almighty and does not seek it except to gain some worldly benefit, he will not smell the fragrance of paradise on Yawm al-Qiyamah, the day of resurrection. Because as we mentioned, knowledge is an act of ibadah, a worship, and any act of ibadah which is done not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is done for other people or other motives and purposes, is completely unacceptable. Inna Allah tayyib la yaqbalu illa tayyib. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure and does not accept that which is pure, which means our a'mal, our actions, must be pure in intentions, must be pure in motivations. If anyone else is included besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will be unacceptable in His court. In other hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever seeks knowledge to boast about it to scholars, argue with the ignorant, or turn people's faces towards him, then he will be in hellfire. This is a very important hadith, and this gives us a chance to actually reflect on what our intentions are when acquiring knowledge. Do we seek knowledge in order to be counted among scholars or to argue with people? Right? So people will call you Sheikh and call you an alim or a mufti, and those titles. Are you after that? Is that where you're seeking knowledge? Or are you seeking knowledge so you can argue with people? Right? You can basically show people down that you know more than them. Or the only thing that you're seeking knowledge is to argue against people who might be wrong and you might be right. But the purpose of you acquiring knowledge is simply for the sake of argument? Or are you seeking knowledge so people's face towards you, that you're seeking fame? All three sorts, then that person shall be in hellfire. Hadith is clear that our intentions need to be pure. Now there are many hadith on this topic, and you can easily go to Kitabul Ilm, the book of knowledge, in the books hadith, and you can find many hadith corroborating the same meaning. One of the pious predecessors, they said, the most regretful person at the time of death is a negligent scholar. Yani an alim who does not act on his ilm. No, what is taken from the scholar is that he establishes the commands and prohibitions. Now, this is an important distinction that he's making. That you don't necessarily, if a person of ilm doesn't necessarily have to be a person of zuhud. Let me explain that a bit. The duty of a person of ilm, the person of knowledge, a scholar, is that he establishes the commands and prohibitions. And as long as they're fulfilling what Allah has ordered, that which is faraz and wajib, obligations, and as long as they're abstaining from that which is haram and makruh tahriman, they're fulfilling their responsibilities and they're fulfilling the responsibilities of the ilm that they have. And that is what is taken from them, and that is what they are expected to do. However, it is not upon him to be in ascetic or to turn away from permissible things, right? Ilm does not mean that you leave the world behind. Acquiring ilm, being a talibul ilm or a scholar, does not mean becoming a zahid, become someone who is uninterested in the world and worldly affairs, right? Although it is recommended for him to minimize his engagement with worldly matters as much as he can, right? It's a good thing to you to do so, but to expect someone or force someone to do the same just because they are formally a talibul ilm, they are labeled as students of knowledge in society, and setting standards for them that if they fail to, for example, pray 100 units of nafil every day, or if they're not fasting every Monday and Thursday, that somehow they're defected or somehow they're wrong or doing evil, or maybe something that is not of the status and stature of what an alim, a scholar or a student of knowledge should be like. Those are all constructs and ideas and innovations that people have created, some of which is a result of the reformist movements in Islam, right? The reformist mindset sometimes places the bar. It expects people to be picture perfect, expects them to act like the Anbiya alayhim salam. But unfortunately, that is not possible because those people who are scholars and those acquiring knowledge are also normal human beings. And if you can't expect other human beings to be perfect, neither should you expect these people to be perfect, right? They may not always subscribe to your standards or come up to your standards of what it means to be a scholar. Okay. But it is recommended, of course, that you minimize this engagement with worldly affairs because unfortunately, that is the scenario. People will judge you on that basis. Plus, knowledge, as we've discussed previously, requires your undivided attention. As long as you're attached to worldly matters, your acquisition of knowledge and how you can benefit yourself or others with it becomes severely impaired, right? So minimize your engagement, but you don't have to completely end it. For not every soul accepts excessive engagement with the world, as people vary. So people are different stages. Some can completely cut them off. Like if someone has an introverted personality, it is easier for them to abstain from mingling with people, right? On the other hand, people with more extroverted tendencies, they need that engagement. So people are on different scales of how they engage with worldly matters. It's not one size fits all, and we should not be judging people based on some standards that we ourselves have set, and which Islam has nothing to do with. Because you'll see in the hadith, different Sahaba came to the Prophet ﷺ asking which is the best amal, which is the best of actions. And for different Sahaba, he would prescribe different things, which means there is no one single action which trumps everything else. Rather, it has to do with one person to the next. Right? We might strive to be better, but it's not something that is incumbent on us. It is narrated that Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah ta'ala used to eat good food. He would say, if the animal is not well fed, it will not work. And so by drawing similarities between himself as a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and an animal which is put to service by the people, if you don't feed it, it's not going to function properly. It's not going to obey you. It's going to cut corners in its amal. Similarly, for the people, if they're not going to eat, if they're not well fed, then they're not going to work, right? Again, this is what Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah ta'ala knows about himself, that he needs the food in order to function properly. Some people can go days without eating, and that doesn't really affect them. Others can't go like 6 hours and starts having negative impacts. So again, this is something that each of us have to self-assess. Where do we stand on the spectrum of engagement, whether it be engagement with people, whether it be engagement in terms of eating or sleeping? All of these things are a case-to-case problem, and each of us will have to assess ourselves and then think about ways how we can modify or limit our worldly engagement without actually putting ourselves in jeopardy, right? So it's not something that a book or a lesson can solve. It takes um, intention, deliberate intention, deliberate practice, trial and error to find that perfect spot where you can engage with the matters of hereafter and building your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that you don't jeopardize this whole journey and this whole path by neglecting your worldly needs. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala used to endure a great deal of hardship in his life. Yani, unlike Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah ta'ala, who would eat good food, Imam Ahmad, on the other hand, would subject himself to hardship because he knew he was able to do so. So temperaments vary. And so this diagnosis is different for each person, and the treatment plan will also be different for each person. Among the characteristics of the scholars of the hereafter is that they know this world is insignificant and the hereafter is noble. So this world and the hereafter, they are like co-wives, right? And a husband is divided between those two wives. So if they favor the hereafter and their actions do not contradict their words, right? So the scholar of the hereafter is that they favor the hereafter, they don't favor the world. And how do we know if someone is favoring the world or is he favoring the hereafter? If their actions do not contradict their words, they're in complete alignment, they do what they preach, or they walk the talk, and then they are scholars of the hereafter. They favor the hereafter. But if they say something but their actions don't agree with them, then in that case, they're preferring the world. And sometimes this might be very subtle. People won't realize this. Um, and if you find someone, is contradicting themselves, then approach them with the utmost respect and care as not to trigger them, right? Maybe it's not out of ignorance that there's a contradiction in their action and in their speech. It's maybe out of negligence, it may be out of ignorance, and doesn't have to be deliberate all the time. So the scholars of the hereafter, their inclination is towards knowledge that benefits in the hereafter, and they avoid knowledge that has little benefit, prioritizing what has great benefit. Okay? And what he's referring to here is that their focus is more on the knowledge of refining oneself or the knowledge of spreading Islam, the deen, amongst the masses, right? Again, it's not fixed to one form of knowledge. It can translate into anything depending on your niyyah and depending on how you approach a certain field and how you act in it. So again, retrospection and putting your case towards a respected scholar and having been evaluated will help you learn and realize whether the path that you're treading on is the path for the hereafter or it might be a path towards the dunya, but you are just not aware because of personal biases or fallacies in your thinking. It is narrated from Shaqiq al-Balkhi, who was the teacher and master of the famous Sufi master Junaid al-Baghdadi. So, Shaqiq al-Balkhi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said to Hatim, "You have accompanied me for some time, so what have you learned?" So one of his other disciples, Hatim, he asked him that you've been accompanying me for some time. What is that you have taken from me? Right? And he said 8 matters. I learned 8 things. Number one, I looked at the creation and saw that every person has something they love, but when they reach the grave, their beloved is separated from them. So I made my beloved my good deeds so that they would be in the grave with me, accompanying me. Number two, I looked at the saying of Allah Almighty, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى. And he who withheld himself from the desires. So I strive my soul to repel desires until it settle upon the obedience of Allah Almighty. Number three, I saw that everyone who possesses something of value cherishes it. Then I looked at his saying, مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَدُ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ. Whatever you have will end, but whatever Allah has is lasting. So whenever I acquired something of value, I directed it towards Him, and you sent it forward to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through sadaqah, for example, so that it would remain for me with Him. Number four, I saw people turning towards wealth, lineage, and prestige, none of which are of any significance. So I looked at the saying of Allah Almighty, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, that indeed the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. So I worked on righteousness and taqwa to be noble in His sight. Number five, I saw people envying each other, so I looked at His saying, نحن قسمنا معيشته نحن قسمنا بينهم معيشتهم في الحياة الدنيا. We have appointed among them their livelihood. So I abandoned envy. Yani, there's no point in envying anyone else because what they have is given to them from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what you don't have was ordained that you do not receive and you'll never get. So envying other people won't get you that which you don't have and which is not meant for you. Number six, I saw them showing enmity to each other. So I looked at the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Inna shaytana lakum aduwwun fattakhidhuhu aduwwa. Indeed, Satan is an enemy to you, so take him as an enemy. So I abandoned their enmity and took Satan alone as an enemy. Number seven, I saw them humbling themselves in seeking sustenance. So I looked at his saying, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. And no creature is there on earth but that upon Allah is its provision. So I busied myself with what is my duty towards Him and left my provision to Him. It's very similar to another place in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاسْتَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. That order your family to pray and be steadfast in prayers. And further mention, Allah mentions that we don't ask risk from you, rather we are the ones giving the risk. Right? So this is busying myself with my duty towards. And lastly, number eight, I saw them relying on their trade, their crafts, and their physical health. So I relied upon Allah Almighty. Right? So after years of suhbah, years of sitting with Shaqiq al-Balkhi, Hatim went away with these 8 trades. And in the longer version of the story, Shaqiq al-Balkhi When he asked, "What did you learn?" and Hatim mentioned, "I learned only 8 things," he retorted back saying that so much sohbah and only 8 things. And when Hatim mentioned these 8 things, Shaqiq rahimahullah ta'ala, he went on saying that if you have truly learned these 8 things, then you need nothing else from me. You need to learn nothing else. You learn everything that you learn for your journey towards the hereafter. So we need to reflect on where we stand on these 8 things. How much trust do we put in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how much trust do we put in our trade, our craft, our jobs, our physical health, our bank balance, etc. When seeking sustenance, is our time spent mostly on our jobs, on our work, our projects, our deadlines, or are we more focused on our prayers and fulfilling the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do we have enemies? Are we arguing with people? Do we have problems with them? Are we trying to cut their throats, their jobs? Or is our focus on trying to defeat Satan? Are we envious of others? Why is that? How can we correct that problem? And what are we interested in? Are we trying to amass wealth? Are we proud of our lineage? Is our social status, is that of any significance to us? Or are we more worried that we don't have the level of taqwa that is needed? What is it that we truly value in this life? How much time do we spend acquiring it? And then what do we do with the thing that we value? Do we use it for this world, or do we use it in for the hereafter? And what is the state of our desires? Are they for Allah Almighty? And are they turned towards Him? Or just we act on every whim that we have, every jaza that we have, whether halal or haram, irrespective? And lastly, what is it that we love so dearly that we would want to be in our graves, that we would not want to part with it? Is it something of the dunya, or is it something of the hereafter? So it's worth reflecting on this, worth noting any areas of deficiency that we have. So be honest with yourself. Have a diary, write these things down. Hiding it is not going to, being blind towards it is not going to help you. Don't share it with anyone, share it with yourself. Be honest with yourself. And then whatever deficiencies you have, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala awwalan, first of all, to grant you the strength and the path, clear for you the path that needs to be taken in order to get out of this conundrum. And also thank Him that He showed you whatever shortcomings you have. He granted you the tawfiq to even think about Him and try to rectify them. Among the characteristics of the scholars of the hereafter is that they are distant from rulers and cautious of interacting with them. Rulers, the elite, those who have no interest in deen and rather completely engaged in worldly matters. Hudayfa radiallahu anhu, he said, beware of the places of temptation. People asked him, what are they? And he said, the doors of rulers. One of you enters upon the ruler who confirms his lies and says what is not true. Yani usually people of influence, people of power, of wealth and status, they hold an influence on people lesser than them in these regards, right? So it is better to keep away from them, rather you be influenced, even if it's not explicit, and end up doing something or saying something that is not going to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, if you see a scholar frequenting rulers, beware of him, for he is a thief. A thief in the sense that he's going to steal from your religion in order to appease um, the rulers. By stealing from the religion means that he's going to take away some ahkam, some rules, some regulations, some divine commands. They hide it from the rulers in order to justify whatever deeds that they're doing. One of the predecessors said, "You will not gain anything from their world except that they will gain something better from your religion." And in order to gain something from the wealth that these rulers and rich people have, you're going to have to abandon something of your religion. Among the characteristics of the scholars of the hereafter is that they do not rush to give legal rulings, and they do not give rulings except about what they're certain of. And now you see people all over social media, everyone thinks of themselves as a mujtahid. Everyone is giving you a fatwa and sharing their opinions. And this is a big problem. Like, are any of us really entitled to share our opinions? Do we really even know how the Sharia works, how Allah's commands works? Do we even have all the knowledge of the Quran and the Hadith to be able to do so? But the fact is, people nowadays, having an opinion is considered important. It's considered actually a prerequisite, or it's considered an ability. And if you can't have an opinion, which means you're indecisive, which means you're not a risk taker, which means you can't think for yourself, and so many other things we have associated with the concept of not having an opinion, that it kind of feels like having an opinion is necessary. And having an opinion in each and every matter is also necessary. And it's not just in the matters of deen, sometimes in the matters of health. As an example, you have people having their own opinions. They read a book, watch a video online, and they think, look, I understand this, and so this must be true. And if this is true, then I'm going to advocate for it, even if it's completely wrong. So, this lack of trust in experts without any reason. Like, if you have a reason for not trusting someone, that's different. But without any reason, and just relying completely on yourself in each and every matter, on your brain, that is a problem in every field, but especially when it comes to your theme, right? So, not having an opinion about a matter, a legal opinion, a religious opinion, it's completely valid. Actually, it's a very safe bet for us to have. The predecessors used to pass on giving legal rulings until it returned to the first one. And they would try their best that they weren't the one who were giving the legal ruling. So they'd refer people to another scholar, then another scholar, and then another scholar. And it kept going back until everyone refused, and that person ended up with the first one saying, "No one's giving me an answer." Only then would they try and give an answer. So their best efforts was to not be the one answering, and we're in a state in which we're the first ones to jump to an answer. Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, "I did not start giving legal opinions except when 70 of Medina's most senior scholars permitted me to do so." And he says that I used to see the senior scholars of Medina, each of them hoping and wishing that his brother, the other scholar, would answer on their behalf and they would need to be the ones answering. And now we, on the other hand, are ready to jump on any chance to give our own personal opinion. Something we need to consider how our predecessors were and how we are. The disconnect between the two is vast. It's worth understanding. Abdurrahman ibn Abi Layla said, "I met in this mosque 120 of the companions of the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no one was asked about a hadith or legal ruling except that he wished his brother had spared him from that." And in this mosque, he most probably refers to Al-Masjid al-Nabawi, but it could potentially also refer to Al-Masjid al-Haram, but the first option is more likely. So 120 companions, not tabi'een, as-Sahaba radiallahu anhu, each would wish that the other Sahabi answers the question or tells about the hadith and they wouldn't have to? Who could have been more knowledgeable about the hadith and the ahkam than the Sahaba radiallahu anhu? But take a look at the care that they presented when it comes to these matters. Where do we stand when it comes to them? What is our default mode when it comes to being asked a question or given the chance to give an opinion? Do we jump right in? Do you try to avoid? What is that we do? Right? They are a role model. They are the standard which we have to achieve. And so assess and then try to improve. Then the matter has come to a point where people who claim knowledge today rush to answer questions that if presented to Umar ibn al-Khattab, ta'ala, anhu, he would have gathered the people of Badr and consulted them. Among the characteristics is that most of their research in the knowledge of deeds is about what corrupts them, troubles the hearts, and stirs doubts. For the external forces of deeds are accessible and easy, but the effort is impure. And rather than focus on the outward fiqh, most of their time is spent in fiqh al-qulub, the fiqh of the hearts. What is the knowledge that's going to benefit them? What kind of deeds corrupt the heart, the soul? What things can cause doubt, right? These are the things which are more subtle, right? They're not very open and explicit. Focusing on them requires much more effort. Working on them requires much more effort. And the scholars of the hereafter, that is what their main focus is usually on. The foundation of religion is protecting oneself from evil, and one cannot protect oneself until one knows it. How can you protect yourself from evil if you don't know how to identify it? So that's where your focus needs to be. Among their characteristics is seeking the secrets of the legislated acts of worship and observing their wisdom. But if one is unable to understand the wisdom, submission to the Sharia is sufficient, right? So it's not only that they abide by the Sharia, which you have to do, they also try to seek the secrets behind these ibadats. Why do we pray? Why do we give zakat? Why are we doing Hajj? Why are we supposed to interact with people in a good manner, good character, especially if we have them? They try to go deep into understanding the secrets and the wisdoms behind these acts. And one of the purposes of studying this book is actually that we also would like to get behind some of the secrets of these worships, right? But even if we don't understand something, remember the opinions present about any of the acts of the ibadat in this book are that from the insights of the giant scholars on whose shoulder that we're standing. Does not necessarily mean that you're going to have to understand or you are going to be able to grasp what they're trying to say, but that in no way is the permission for us to be lax or be easy in our ibadats that we're doing. And lastly, among their characteristics is following the companions, the Sahaba, and the best of their successors, the Tabi'in, and avoiding every innovation, every innovation not found in the time of the Sahaba or the Tabi'in. And they try to keep their amal as pure as they can, as close as they can to that which was the amal of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahu a'lamu bisawab wa ilmuhu atam. With that, we conclude the book of knowledge. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from the seekers of knowledge which will benefit us in the hereafter, amongst those who are the scholars of the hereafter, allows us to avoid knowledge which will not benefit us in the hereafter, and make us the best version of ourselves, one which He will accept and one which He will grant His mercy. and His grace in this world and the hereafter. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب.